he abandoned his pregnant girlfriend. Years later, her son gave him something unforgettable. He had no idea who saved him. She was pregnant and homeless after the man she loved chose status over love. Years later, her son, raised with nothing but grit and grace, accidentally fed a starving beggar who turned out to be the very father who abandoned them. What happened next will break your heart and heal it all at once. Naomi's journey from betrayal to triumph is one you'll never forget, and her strength might just change how you see forgiveness forever. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring stories like this one. Naomi Blake stood by the tiny kitchen window of their one-bedroom apartment in East Houston, folding a tiny pair of yellow baby socks. The sun filtered in through the dusty blinds, casting a soft glow over the counter where baby clothes were stacked in hopeful anticipation. A gentle smile curved her lips. She imagined what it would be like to dress her baby boy, to feel his tiny fingers wrap around hers. Life had been hard, yes, but it was finally moving towards something beautiful, or so she thought. The door creaked open behind her. Naomi turned, her smile ready for the man she loved, the man she'd built her dreams around. But Derek's face was a mask, cold, detached, almost clinical. Her stomach twisted, a deeper ache than the constant soreness of late pregnancy. He didn't say hello. He didn't take off his coat. He just looked at her, looked through her. "I want a divorce," he said flatly, like he was announcing a change in weather. Naomi froze. The socks slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor. "What?" "I've met someone else," Derek continued, not even pausing to soften the blow. "Her name is Rebecca. She understands me. She's smart, well-educated, and comes from a family that matters. She's going to help me build the kind of life I deserve." Naomi blinked rapidly, as if doing so might make the moment disappear. You're leaving me? Now?" "I'm 8 months pregnant, Derek." "That child will be better off without the limitations your background would place on him," he replied, voice emotionless, like he was reading a spreadsheet. His words struck harder than a slap. Naomi stumbled back a step, her hands instinctively flying to her swollen belly. "You don't mean that. Derek, we built this together. You remember how we started? I remember struggling, eating rice and canned beans, counting pennies for gas. I'm not that man anymore, Naomi. I can't afford to be." "And I'm not asking you to be," she cried. "I stood by you when you were a nobody. I cheered every little promotion. I believed in your dream when no one else did." "I've outgrown that life," he said, eyes turning away. "And I've outgrown you. Please, Derek, don't do this. Don't do this to our son." His jaw tightened. "Pack your things. I want you out by tonight." By tonight. As if she were just a tenant overstaying her lease. Naomi's knees buckled and she fell to the floor, grabbing the hem of his tailored trousers. "You loved me once." "I thought I did, but love doesn't build legacies." Then he turned and walked away. That night, the streets of Houston were a blur of headlights and sirens, of faces that didn't see her, didn't care. Naomi sat on a concrete bench near the bus stop, cradling her stomach as the baby kicked beneath her palm, agitated, as if sensing the chaos. The small suitcase at her feet held everything she owned. Her phone battery was dead. She had nowhere to go. She was an orphan, raised in a foster system that shuffled her from house to house like a pawn nobody wanted. At midnight, she wandered into a nearby church. The doors were open, the pews empty. She curled up in the back row, shivering from the cold seeping through the stone walls and the colder absence left by Derek's betrayal. She hadn't noticed the frail woman approaching until a voice, raspy yet gentle, called out, "Child, are you all right?" Naomi looked up, her face streaked with silent tears. "No," she whispered. The woman's name was Mrs. Hattie Monroe, the church's caretaker, a widow, childless, with a weathered face and a cane that tapped softly with each step. She listened as Naomi poured out her story through broken sobs. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cast judgment. She simply opened the doors to the small caretaker's room at the back of the building and said, "You'll stay here tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." Naomi collapsed onto the thin mattress and wept until she had no more tears to give. The next morning, as Houston's early light crept across the stained glass windows, Naomi woke to the gentle clatter of a kettle, Mrs. Monroe handed her a cup of peppermint tea and a piece of warm toast. "You'll need strength," the woman said. "Babies come when they want, not when we're ready." 3 nights later, Naomi's labor started. There was no time to reach a hospital, no time for anything but faith and grit. Mrs. Monroe boiled water, tore clean sheets into strips, and held Naomi's hand through the pain and panic. Hours later, in that tiny room that smelled of lemon oil and church incense, Naomi gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She cradled him against her chest, his tiny heartbeat thudding against hers like a whisper of hope. "What will you call him?" Mrs. Monroe asked softly. Naomi stared at her son through tears. "Elijah," she whispered, "because he's my miracle." In the days that followed, Naomi barely slept. She took care of Elijah, changed his diapers, rocked him through the night, and breastfed him until her body ached. She cooked meals with ingredients donated by church members, always making sure Mrs. Monroe ate first. She cleaned the pews and polished the altar. In exchange, Mrs. Monroe let her stay in the caretaker's room and help take care of Elijah when Naomi started job hunting. But job hunting while carrying a baby was next to impossible. Store managers barely let her speak before waving her off. She went to diners, laundromats, gas stations. No one wanted a single mother with a newborn. One afternoon, as she walked past a construction site with Elijah strapped to her chest, she overheard a group of workers complaining about the food truck's spoiled lunch meat. Without thinking, Naomi turned and approached the foreman. "Excuse me, sir. I know how to cook. I could make meals for your crew, hot meals, home-cooked, clean. I just need a chance." The man, tall and skeptical, looked her up and down. "You? Cook for 40 men? Just give me one shot," she said. "If they don't love it, don't pay me." He shrugged. "All right, one shot." The next morning, Naomi borrowed pans from the church kitchen, bought ingredients with the last of her savings, and made meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and baked cornbread. It was a hit. The workers devoured every bite. By the end of the week, the foreman handed her cash and said, "Same time Monday?" Naomi almost cried. From then on, she woke at 4:00 a.m. each day to prep meals, packed them into foil trays, and carried them in a used wagon she'd found behind a dumpster. With Elijah swaddled against her chest, she became a familiar sight on the dusty path between the church and the construction site. One morning, Mrs. Monroe stopped her at the door. "You can't carry on like this much longer, child." Naomi braced herself. "I have to." Mrs. Monroe touched her arm. "I mean, you shouldn't have to. You and Elijah can stay with me in my apartment above the church. It's not much, but it's home. You need a home." Naomi didn't argue. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness. That night, Elijah slept in a crib for the first time. Naomi sat beside him, stroking his soft cheeks, whispering promises into the stillness. "You won't suffer for your father's choices," she told him. "I will build a better world for you, brick by brick, even if I have to carry each one myself." And outside, the city rumbled on, unaware of the quiet, fierce transformation happening inside a tiny apartment above a church. Naomi Blake, abandoned and forgotten, was beginning to rise. The summer sun rose slowly over Houston's east side, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. But inside the small apartment above the church, Naomi Blake was already awake. She hadn't truly slept in days, not since Elijah was born. Every sound startled her. Every cry from her newborn son sent her heart racing. Her body still ached from labor. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, but her eyes, though red and weary, burned with a kind of fire that came only from a mother who had everything to fight for. Elijah, barely 5 days old, was swaddled in a soft blue blanket donated by one of the churchwomen. He slept curled against her chest as Naomi rocked gently in a squeaky second-hand chair by the window. Outside, the city bustled with life, but in that small room, time moved differently. Naomi counted breaths, his and hers. Every rise and fall of his tiny chest was a miracle. Mrs. Monroe brought her a plate of toast and scrambled eggs. "You need to eat," the older woman said, setting the plate down on the nightstand. "You're no good to that baby if you collapse." Naomi gave her a weak smile. "Thank you for everything." Mrs. Monroe just waved her hand. "A mother's strength isn't just in her arms, it's in her will. And yours, child. It's something fierce." That afternoon, Naomi tried to go back to work, at least to find some. She dressed Elijah in the cleanest outfit she had and tucked him into a carrier strapped tight to her chest. She wore her hair pulled back, a light sweater hiding the postpartum weight she hadn't had time to think about. Her footsteps were slow, but determined. Her first stop was a corner diner that always had a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The manager, a tired-looking man with greasy hands, glanced up from his paperwork. "You got childcare?" he asked. "I'll keep him with me," Naomi said, smiling hopefully. "No can do. Health code, next." At the gas station 2 blocks down, the cashier didn't even let her finish her sentence before shaking her head. "We don't hire women with babies. It's a safety issue." By the third rejection, Naomi stopped counting. Door after door closed in her face. She walked miles with blistered feet, her back screaming from the weight of her son. But she kept going, the sun hot on her skin, her lips dry, her stomach hollow. At sunset, just as she was about to give up and return to the church, she passed a rundown fruit stand operated by an older woman with dark skin and striking silver braids. The wooden table was stacked with bananas, oranges, and mangoes. Naomi paused, tempted by the scent of ripe fruit, but also by the warmth in the woman's eyes. "Child, you look like you're gonna fall over," the woman said, peering at her with a furrowed brow. Naomi hesitated. I'm looking for work." The woman raised an eyebrow. "When last you ate?" Naomi swallowed. "Yesterday morning." The woman clucked her tongue and pressed a ripe banana into her hand. "Sit, eat, then we talk." Naomi obeyed, collapsing onto an overturned crate. She peeled the banana and ate it slowly, every bite a blessing. "My name's Hattie Monroe," the woman said. "What's yours?" "Naomi," she replied. "Naomi Blake." "Well, Naomi Blake, I could use a pair of hands." Mrs. Monroe, this version older, broader, with a sharp wit and warm heart, pointed at a second tray of fruit. "Take that to the office park 3 blocks west. Sell what you can. You bring back my capital, you keep the profit. That's the deal." Naomi stared at her, stunned. "You'd trust me? Just like that? You look like a woman who's been kicked down, but not broken. I trust that." Naomi nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She tied the tray with a piece of cloth, adjusted Elijah against her chest, and set off. The sun was dipping below the rooftops when she reached the office block. The glass building still hummed with late-hour workers. Naomi called out softly, hesitantly at first, "Fresh fruit, sweet bananas, juicy oranges, only $1." At first, people ignored her, but then a young woman in a blazer bought 2 mangoes. A security guard bought 3 oranges. A janitor handed her a $5 bill and waved off the change. By the time Naomi returned to the fruit stand, the tray was almost empty. Her feet ached, her legs wobbled, but her eyes were alive. Mrs. Monroe counted the returned bills and gave a small nod. "You did good. Come back tomorrow." The next day, Naomi returned, and the day after that. For weeks, she walked the same route, calling out her wares with Elijah pressed to her chest. Her face grew tan from the sun, her arms stronger, her legs surer. But the city didn't grow easier. Rain poured for days at a time, soaking both mother and child. On one occasion, a group of teenage boys mocked her, calling her "fruit girl" and throwing an empty can at her feet. Another time, an officer accused her of loitering too close to a bank and made her move 5 blocks away. Still, Naomi pressed on. Mrs. Monroe started saving a plate of food for her each evening. "Eat first, count later," she'd say. And Naomi obeyed, grateful beyond words. They became a family, the old woman who'd lost her own to time and heartbreak, and the young mother who had nothing left but her son and her will to survive. When Elijah turned 1 month old, Mrs. Monroe threw a small party with candles and a single cupcake. "You made it, baby boy," she cooed, bouncing him on her lap. "You got a mother made of fire." Naomi smiled through tears. "He's the reason I breathe." As weeks turned to months, Elijah began to giggle at the sound of coins clinking in Naomi's tray. He reached for oranges and tried to gnaw on apples with his toothless gums. When he was too big to carry in front, Naomi learned to tie him to her back with a cloth sling. His giggles became the music of her hustle. Every evening, Naomi and Mrs. Monroe sat on the apartment steps, watching the city's lights flicker on one by one. Elijah babbled nonsense while chewing on his stuffed giraffe. Naomi would sometimes catch herself imagining what life might look like in 5 years, in 10. Could she open her own shop? Could she afford school for Elijah? One night, after counting her coins and realizing she'd saved over $200 in a tin box under her bed, Naomi whispered to Mrs. Monroe, "I think I want to do more. Not just sell fruit. I want to cook. I want to make meals people remember." Mrs. Monroe smiled knowingly. "Then do it. You got the hands. You got the heart." But life, as Naomi had come to learn, rarely offered blessings without trials. One rainy afternoon, she noticed Elijah's cheeks were flushed. He fussed more than usual, tugging at his ears and whimpering. That night, he developed a fever that no sponge bath could break. His little body burned, his cries shrill and nonstop. At dawn, Naomi rushed him to the emergency room at Houston General. The nurse took one look and called a doctor. After a flurry of tests and worried whispers, a young pediatrician finally approached Naomi. "Your son has meningitis," he said gently. "We caught it early, but he needs treatment immediately. IV antibiotics, around-the-clock monitoring, and possibly surgery if swelling increases. The cost will be around $1,500. Naomi's world cracked. She had $200 in savings. That was it. She fell to her knees in the hallway, clutching Elijah's baby blanket, sobbing into the worn fabric. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't take my baby." She didn't notice Mrs. Monroe walking in until the older woman dropped a wrinkled envelope onto her lap. "My savings," she said. "Everything I got. He's worth it." Naomi stared at her. "But, Mrs. Monroe..." "He's my grandson as far as I'm concerned, and this family takes care of its own." They handed the envelope to the billing department. It wasn't quite enough, but the hospital took it and started treatment. Elijah pulled through. He was weak, pale, but alive. Naomi sat by his hospital bed every second, whispering lullabies and promises of better days. That night, as rain battered the windows and monitors beeped softly beside her, Naomi didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She simply stared at her son's small hand curled around her finger and made a silent vow. "Never again," she whispered. "Never again will I be powerless when you need me." The next morning, she asked the nurse for a notebook. She began writing plans, recipes, menus, places where workers gathered and ate. She didn't know how or when, but Naomi Blake was done surviving. She was going to build something. For Elijah, for herself, for every woman who had ever been left behind. The air smelled of asphalt and exhaust as Naomi stood outside the construction site on Crawford Street, holding a large tray of steaming food. The sun beat down relentlessly, her back sticky with sweat. Elijah strapped tightly to her shoulders, his little hand gripping the edge of her shirt. Her legs ached. Her feet throbbed in her worn sneakers, and her arms trembled from carrying the food from the church kitchen all the way to the site. But Naomi smiled. It was her first official day feeding the workers. She had made jollof rice, fried plantains, and grilled chicken. The spices clung to the air, mixing with dust and diesel. For a moment she doubted herself. Would they like it? Would they buy it? Would they laugh in her face? But when the foreman, a burly man named Clarence, stepped forward, sniffed the air, and muttered, "Damn, that smells like home," the other workers gathered like bees to honey. The first man paid her $5 and didn't ask for change. The next handed her a 10. Within 30 minutes, her tray was empty and her pockets full of more cash than she'd made in an entire week selling fruit. Naomi nearly cried. The following week, she returned with 2 trays. Then 3. She borrowed larger pots from the church, adjusted her routine to start cooking at 3 a.m., and enlisted the help of a teenager named Shay from the neighborhood to help carry everything. Elijah, now a little over a year old, watched her every move as if learning the rhythm of her life through observation alone. He sat in his high chair and clapped every time she stirred a pot, as if her resilience were a performance. By the 3rd month, Naomi had contracts with 2 more construction sites. Word spread about the young mother who made food that reminded men of home, who never skimped on portions, who always added a warm smile with every plate. She wrote her menu by hand each morning, adjusted for what ingredients were affordable. Some days it was gumbo, other days it was spicy turkey stew with sweet potatoes. She used her profits carefully, some for ingredients, some for diapers and Elijah's formula, and a little each week into a jar labeled "Someday." She and Mrs. Monroe still lived in the small church apartment, but their dreams no longer fit inside its walls. One evening, after Elijah had fallen asleep with mashed carrots on his chin, Naomi sat with Mrs. Monroe at the kitchen table. "I want to open something real," she whispered. "A place people can sit, eat, feel like they matter." Mrs. Monroe sipped her tea. "What's stopping you?" Naomi looked down. Fear, money, everything. The older woman reached across the table and placed her hand over Naomi's. "You survived the streets pregnant and alone. You built something from nothing. You've got everything you need." Naomi nodded slowly. "Then I'm going to do it. Not for me. For him." The next morning, she marched to the local council office and asked what it would take to open a food cart legally. Licenses, inspections, fees, too many obstacles, too little money. But she didn't walk away discouraged. She asked questions, took notes, researched in the church library at night while Elijah slept curled on her lap. Over the next 6 months, Naomi worked harder than she ever thought humanly possible. She cooked. She cleaned. She took on side gigs, washing clothes, babysitting, even sweeping hair at a nearby barbershop for tips. She cut her meals in half to save more. She bartered with a carpenter from the church to build her a custom cart in exchange for a month of free lunches. And then, finally, one spring morning, her cart stood shining on the sidewalk outside the transit station. It was painted in rich blues and golds, with the name The Willowspoon hand-lettered across the side in bold, curling script. The first day, she sold out before noon. By the end of the month, people were lining up before she even arrived. She began hiring other women, single mothers like her, women who needed second chances. She taught them to cook, to take orders, to smile even when they were tired to their bones. She paid them fairly, trained them well, and treated them with dignity. Elijah, now 2, toddled around the church halls like he owned the place. He had a mop of tight curls, bright eyes, and an endless curiosity. Naomi made him wear a tiny apron on weekends, and he'd stand beside her pretending to take orders with a spoon in hand. "Order up, Mama," he'd shout, and the entire cart would erupt in laughter. Still, Naomi never stopped saving. Every spare dollar went into the someday jar, which had grown into a full safe box beneath the bed. But life, true to its nature, was never content to let someone rise without testing their footing. One evening, Naomi was locking up her cart when a man in a navy suit approached. He was tall, white, in his 50s, and had the kind of polished demeanor that set her nerves on edge. "I'm Ken Dunlap," he said. "I represent the Northland Development Group. We're buying up this block for a new business park. That includes the sidewalk you're currently operating on." Naomi's stomach dropped. "I have a license. This space is approved." "Sure," he replied, shrugging. "For now, but zoning will change. And frankly, you don't want to be the only little cart left standing when the bulldozers come." She folded her arms. "I'm not selling." He smirked. "That's unfortunate. I always hate when people mistake pride for opportunity." He handed her a business card and walked away. Naomi tore the card in half. A week later, someone broke into her cart. Nothing of value was stolen, but the burners were smashed, the wheels slashed, and her supplies ruined. Police filed a report, but shrugged when she mentioned the developer. "Could be anyone," the officer said. "Houston's got crime like pollen." Naomi stood over the wreckage, hands trembling, rage boiling in her chest. Elijah clutched her leg, looking up at her with wide, scared eyes. "I'll fix it," she whispered to him. "I swear, baby, I'll fix it." Mrs. Monroe called in every favor she had. Church members donated pots, pans, supplies. The carpenter returned and reinforced the cart with metal plating. Naomi installed a lockbox and a small camera. She returned to her spot the very next day. People came. They came in droves. And when Ken Dunlap walked by, seeing the long line stretching around the corner, he turned and walked the other way. The incident changed something in Naomi. She no longer saw herself as the girl who got left behind. She was a fighter, a builder, a leader. She started giving away food to the homeless every Friday. She delivered free meals to a battered women's shelter. She taught basic budgeting classes at the church. When people asked why she did it, she simply said, "Because someone once gave me a banana and a place to sleep. That's all it took." By the time Elijah turned 5, Naomi had opened a second cart in Midtown and employed 6 women full-time. She rented a small 2-bedroom apartment not far from the church and enrolled Elijah in a preschool where he quickly rose to the top of his class. He loved to read. He loved to help. He never stopped asking questions. "Why do you always give food away, Mama?" he asked one evening as they sat on the couch, his head resting on her lap. "Because we were once hungry," Naomi replied, "and now that we're not, it's our job to feed others." He looked up at her, eyes wide and solemn. "I want to help people too when I grow up." Naomi kissed his forehead. "You already are, sweetheart. Every smile you give someone helps." That night, as Elijah slept soundly in his room, Naomi stood at the window and stared out at the city that had once felt so cold, so unforgiving. She thought of Derek, of the man who had thrown her out like garbage, who had never met the boy he helped create. She didn't know where he was now. She didn't care. What she had built, this life, this boy, this quiet revolution of kindness, was her revenge and her reward. She had no interest in bitterness, only progress. And in the shadows of the city skyline, Naomi whispered a silent vow to herself. Someday isn't coming. It's already here. By the time Elijah turned 6, he had already mastered the art of greeting customers with a smile, handing out napkins like a seasoned host, and remembering the regulars by name. Every afternoon after school, he'd run straight to the Willowspoon's new semi-permanent stall near Midtown Medical Center, where Naomi had been granted a city lease for an upgraded space with a seating area and a shaded canopy. It was a modest setup, but to Elijah it felt like a palace built on his mother's love and sweat. Naomi had added new items to the menu: okra stew, slow-roasted brisket, and her signature honey butter biscuits that people waited in line for even on rainy days. She worked 12-hour days, but it no longer felt like a burden. Each plate she served was a reminder of how far she'd come. She had hired 4 more women, most of them single mothers or grandmothers raising their grandchildren. One of them, Tanisha, had escaped an abusive relationship and cried the first day Naomi handed her a Willowspoon apron and said, "You're not broken. You're rebuilding." Still, Naomi's dreams kept growing. She didn't just want to serve food, she wanted to create a haven, a place where people weren't just fed, but seen. She began saving to lease a permanent storefront. The someday jar had grown into a real business account with a modest balance and a purpose that stretched far beyond survival. Every evening, she and Elijah would sit on the floor of their small apartment, sorting receipts and counting coins. He had learned how to tally with chalk on the tile and proudly announced profits like a tiny accountant. One evening, as Naomi stirred a pot of gumbo in their kitchen, Elijah stood at the window, watching the street below. His voice broke the silence. "Mama," he said softly, "do I have a daddy?" Naomi turned the burner low and wiped her hands on a towel. She knew this question would come one day. She had rehearsed dozens of answers over the years, none of which ever felt quite right. "You do," she said gently, walking over and kneeling beside him. "He was part of how you got here, but he made different choices, choices that didn't include us." Did he love me? The question cut deeper than any knife. Naomi took a deep breath and wrapped her arms around her son. "I don't know if he ever understood what love really meant," she answered honestly. "But I know this. You've never been unloved. Not for a single second." Elijah nodded, quiet, thoughtful beyond his years. He never asked again. Months later, Naomi's dream took its next leap. A vacant storefront near the old church went on the market. A weathered brick building with peeling paint and dusty windows, but solid bones and plenty of heart. It was only 6 blocks from their apartment, across from a community park and within walking distance for dozens of families. The price was steep, but Naomi didn't flinch. She met with the realtor, signed the loan papers with trembling hands, and walked through the creaky wooden door of what would become the first official location of the Willowspoon Cafe. Elijah stood beside her, holding her hand. "Is this ours, Mama?" Naomi smiled down at him, her heart fluttering like wings. "It is, baby. It's ours." She poured every ounce of energy into transforming the space. Church friends, customers, and even a few strangers volunteered their time. The walls were repainted in deep mustard and sage. Mismatched chairs were refinished and scrubbed clean. Elijah helped plant a small herb garden out front, proudly declaring that basil would be their secret ingredient. 2 months later, the Willowspoon Cafe opened its doors. The line wrapped around the block. Local papers ran features on the single mother who rose from the streets to success. A reporter named Calvin Ortiz interviewed Naomi in her kitchen, noting her steady hands and calm voice. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. "What's your secret?" Naomi wiped flour from her forehead and smiled. "Resilience, and a whole lot of love." Within a year, the cafe became a community staple. Naomi hosted Friday night soul food dinners, offered free breakfasts for school kids, and kept a pay-what-you-can bowl near the register for anyone short on cash. Her kindness multiplied, inspiring donations, partnerships, and more volunteers than she ever imagined. Mrs. Monroe, now retired from the church, moved into the guest room of Naomi's apartment. She spent her days sitting on the cafe's front porch, telling stories to children and sipping sweet tea while watching Elijah thrive. "He's got your fire," she told Naomi one afternoon, watching the boy help serve biscuits with a lopsided grin. "But he's got his own light too, a softer kind." Elijah, now 10, had grown into a bright, empathetic boy with an appetite for books and a heart as wide as Texas. He excelled in school, earning top grades and impressing teachers with his focus and drive. One day, he brought home a flyer for a prestigious private middle school, full scholarship opportunities for high-achieving students from underrepresented backgrounds. Naomi read the flyer 3 times. "You should apply," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you think I'm good enough?" Elijah asked. Naomi cupped his face in her hands. "Baby, you were born good enough." He applied. He got in, full ride. Naomi cried when the acceptance letter came. Mrs. Monroe wept too, holding the paper like it was sacred. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the moment it all turns." But far from them, on the wealthier side of town, someone else's moment was collapsing. Derek Walsh, once ambitious, polished, untouchable, was unraveling. His marriage to Rebecca Harrington had never been a fairy tale. It had been an alliance, a trade of power and appearance. And now, after nearly a decade, it was crumbling. Rebecca, ever the strategist, had moved on to someone wealthier and older, a venture capitalist with international ties. She left Derek without warning, cleaning out their joint accounts and taking with her the evidence of something far worse. Derek had siphoned funds from clients to finance their lifestyle: lavish trips, luxury cars, private clubs. With Rebecca gone, all his secrets came to light. One Monday morning, men in dark suits arrived at Derek's office. The Economic Crimes Task Force arrested him in front of his staff, the same junior analysts he had once mocked for dreaming too small. The headlines were brutal. Former VP caught in fraud scandal. High-rise dreams crashed down. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. No appeals, no one to stand by him in court, no one to visit him in jail. Inside those gray walls, Derek sat alone with his thoughts. And for the first time in years, they drifted not to money or power or status, but to the woman he'd discarded like trash, and the unborn child he had never met. He remembered Naomi's laughter, the way she used to run her fingers through his hair as they lay on a mattress too small for two. He remembered her words, soft, honest, real. He wondered if she hated him. He wondered if his child knew his name, and he hated himself for not knowing the answers. Meanwhile, Elijah flourished. He was top of his class, tutoring others in math and reading, joining the science club, and helping organize food drives on weekends. At home, he helped Naomi with bookkeeping and planning for a second cafe. He still called Mrs. Monroe Grandma and brought her wildflowers from the park. Naomi never mentioned Derek's name, but the absence of him was a silent thread they all carried. It shaped their choices, their fears, their drive. One night, as Elijah sat beside her after dinner flipping through a photo album, he looked up and said, "You never let me feel like I was missing anything, Mama." Naomi paused, brushing a strand of hair behind his ear. "Because you weren't. Love doesn't leave holes, baby. It fills them." And in the hum of the city, in the clatter of dishes and laughter from the cafe, in the rustling of pages and the scent of fresh biscuits, Naomi Blake realized something profound. She had not just survived betrayal. She had transformed it into a life full of light, compassion, and second chances. And her son, her Elijah, was not the child of abandonment. He was the legacy of resilience. Elijah was 12 when everything changed again. It began with a cough that wouldn't go away and ended with a fever so high that his lips turned pale and his fingers trembled. Naomi rushed him to the ER, her mind racing with every possible outcome, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the doctor's questions. "It's just a virus," the nurse assured her, scribbling notes on a clipboard. "But we'll keep him overnight for observation." Still, Naomi didn't sleep. She sat by Elijah's bed, fingers laced tightly around his, whispering prayers and lullabies she hadn't sung since he was a baby. The memory of that hospital corridor from years ago, when she had nearly lost him to meningitis, surged back like a flood. But this time, there was no panic in her chest, only a calm, steady resolve. When Elijah was discharged, still weak but smiling, Naomi took it as a reminder. Health was fragile, time was precious, and her mission, to build a life Elijah could stand on, was far from over. In the months that followed, Elijah threw himself into school with renewed purpose. At 13, he joined a summer robotics program hosted by the local university and won first place in a team challenge. At 14, he launched a small website helping students access free academic resources, which earned him a City Youth Innovation Award. Naomi watched all of it with tears in her eyes and a pride so deep it anchored her. But she also noticed the changes, the way Elijah had started to carry more than just his school bag. He carried awareness, a quiet gravity. He saw her exhaustion at night, the way she rubbed her temples after balancing cafe books, the strain in her shoulders she tried to hide behind smiles. One night, after she tucked in the invoices for the week and switched off the lights, she found Elijah still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad. "Can I help manage the online orders?" he asked. "I can build a tracking system." Naomi paused, watching him through the dim glow of the hallway light. "You're supposed to be a kid." "I am," he said with a grin. "Just a kid who wants his mom to sleep." They laughed and then worked together side by side, building a new digital wing to the Willowspoon cafe. Orders doubled in a month. Customers raved about the seamless delivery system. A local blogger wrote an article titled, "The 14-Year-Old Genius Behind the City's Favorite Cafe." But not everyone was thrilled by Naomi's success. One evening, as she walked to her parked car after locking up, two men in dark clothing blocked her path. They weren't aggressive, just looming. One leaned against her car, the other stood with arms crossed. "You Naomi Blake?" the one on the left asked. "Yes," she said slowly. He pulled out a card, Ken Dunlap, real estate consultant. She recognized the name. "We represent a new investor group," he said. "We're making big changes in this neighborhood. Gentrification, expansion, all that. Your spot, prime location. We're offering cash, double market value." Naomi didn't flinch, not interested. He smiled thinly. "You should be. The block's going to change whether you like it or not. Better to leave rich than be pushed out." Naomi met his eyes with fire in hers. "I built this place with my hands, with my son watching. I'm not leaving." The other man shrugged. "We'll see." The next week, someone slashed the cafe's tires. A routine inspection found false code violations and fined her heavily. A break-in shattered 2 windows, though nothing was stolen. Naomi replaced the glass, paid the fines, and kept the doors open. She refused to be moved, not by fear, not by greed. Meanwhile, Elijah grew stronger, smarter, more curious about the world. He took AP classes, joined debate, and co-founded an after-school tech club. Naomi marveled at the way he carried himself, graceful, grounded, respectful. He still helped at the cafe on weekends, always smiling, always listening. One Sunday afternoon, during a community cookout, Naomi had organized to raise funds for a women's shelter. A city councilwoman stopped by. She tasted the food, toured the cafe, and sat down with Naomi. "You ever think about expanding?" she asked. "Your impact here is massive. We have grants for entrepreneurs, especially women of color. You could turn this into something citywide." Naomi hesitated. "I've thought about it. I'm just cautious." "Don't be," the woman said. "You have a legacy here. People believe in you." That night, Naomi sat with Elijah on the couch, the glow of the TV flickering in the background. "What if I opened a second location?" she asked. He looked up. "I think it's time." So she did. With the grant money and her savings, she opened Willowspoon No. 2 across town in a more upscale neighborhood. It was brighter, bigger, and had a professional kitchen Elijah had helped design. It employed 10 women, offered internships for local teens, and became a bridge between communities that had once barely spoken. Naomi's face was featured on a billboard with the slogan, "Serving more than food, serving second chances." And through it all, Elijah never changed. Even with local fame, scholarships pouring in, and awards stacking up, he remained humble. He kept cleaning tables when needed, made deliveries to regulars who couldn't drive anymore, and always kissed his mother goodnight. But the question of his father remained like a ghost, silent but present. One night, after his 16th birthday party, he asked again, "Did you ever try to find him?" Naomi stirred her tea slowly. Once, years ago, but I realized something. I wasn't trying to find him for you. I was trying to prove something to myself, and I didn't need to. Elijah looked at her carefully. But what if I do? Naomi nodded. If that day comes, I'll stand by you, no matter what you find. But neither of them had to look, because fate brought Derek back in the most unexpected way. It was a sweltering Thursday afternoon. Elijah was walking home from the community center, headphones on, when he noticed a man curled on a bench outside the train station. He looked old, tired, sunburned, with a stained shirt and torn shoes. Something in his posture, slumped, defeated, stirred something in Elijah. He walked over, pulled off his headphones and said, "Sir, are you hungry?" The man looked up, startled. His eyes were bloodshot, his beard overgrown, but behind the grime, Elijah saw something familiar, something he couldn't place. I'm fine," the man mumbled. "You don't look fine," Elijah said gently. "Come on. My mom runs a place not far from here. You'll get a hot meal." He helped the man up and led him slowly down the block. The man didn't speak much, just kept glancing at Elijah, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. When they reached the Willowspoon, Naomi was behind the counter counting receipts. She looked up and froze. Time collapsed. The air thinned. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Derek. Older, broken, hollow. She didn't need to ask. He didn't need to speak. Elijah turned to them both, confused. "Mom?" Naomi stepped around the counter, eyes fixed on the man who had once cast her into darkness. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling. Elijah's head snapped toward her. "Wait! This is him! He's my father!" The silence was unbearable. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. Naomi whispered, "Yes." Elijah stared at her, then at the man beside him. "You're the one who left her?" His voice cracked. "You left us?" Derek sank onto a chair, hands shaking. I don't have any excuses. I was a fool. I thought I was trading up. I didn't know what I was giving up." "You didn't even try to find us?" Elijah demanded. "I didn't think I deserved to," Derek said, eyes full of shame. Naomi stepped forward, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "You don't have to forgive him tonight. Or ever, but you don't have to carry the anger either." Elijah's jaw clenched. He turned and walked out the door. Naomi looked at Derek and quietly said, "He's everything you weren't. He became that without you." Derek nodded. "I know." She poured him a bowl of soup and set it in front of him. "Eat, then go." That night, Naomi sat beside Elijah on their front steps. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not telling you sooner." "I'm not angry at you," Elijah whispered. "I'm angry that he missed all of this, that he missed you. He didn't deserve to." Naomi wrapped an arm around him. "Maybe not, but we deserve peace." And somewhere deep inside Elijah, the fire that had always burned in him flickered gently in the wind. Still strong, but a little calmer. Not because the past had changed, but because the future still belonged to him. Derek Walsh had never known true silence until the prison gates closed behind him. Concrete, metal, and the endless buzz of fluorescent lights became his new world. He served his full sentence, 8 long years, in a correctional facility in West Texas, and with every passing day, something in him withered. The pride that once filled his chest, the swagger that followed his every step, the cold ambition that made him discard people like receipts, all of it disintegrated. In prison, no one cared that he had been a vice president or that he used to wear tailored suits and drive a Mercedes. He was just another number, another man stripped of title, status, and identity. And in that hollow silence, Derek began to think. He thought about Naomi, about how she had held him when he had nothing, believed in him when no one else did. He remembered the small apartment they once shared, the smell of her cooking, her laughter at stupid late-night jokes. He thought about the night he told her to leave, the way she begged, the way he turned away. He thought about the child he had never met, his son. And as the years passed, regret grew into a gnawing ache that never left his bones. He stopped expecting redemption. He stopped dreaming of reunions. He knew he'd forfeited those rights the moment he chose power over people, illusion over love. When he was released at 51, he looked 70. His once thick hair was gray and thinning. His skin sagged, shoulders stooped. He had no savings, no job, no home. Rebecca had long since vanished, remarried to a man in Dubai. The world had moved on without him. He drifted for months, sleeping in shelters, sometimes on the streets of Houston Island, a part of the city he used to look down on from a luxury condo. He took day work when he could, washing dishes, cleaning alleys, picking up garbage after events. But no one wanted to hire a former convict with a name that still sparked Google hits for embezzlement. One sweltering Thursday afternoon, Derek found a quiet corner outside a law office near Midtown and sank to the pavement, back against the brick wall, eyes half closed. The world moved around him, heels clacking, phones ringing, life rushing past as if he were invisible. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. That's when he heard a voice. "Sir, are you hungry?" Derek looked up, blinking into the sunlight. A young man stood before him, mid-20s, dressed in slacks and a collared shirt, a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. There was something familiar about the shape of his face, the intensity of his gaze. I could use something," Derek croaked, too tired to pretend pride. "Come with me," the young man said kindly. "There's a restaurant nearby. You'll eat like a king." Derek tried to stand, his legs trembling beneath him. The young man gently took his arm and helped him rise. They walked 2 blocks in silence, Derek too winded to speak, the young man not forcing conversation. As they neared the restaurant, Derek slowed. Something about the name, the Willowspoon, stirring a long-buried memory. Before he could piece it together, they stepped inside. Naomi was behind the counter. She was arranging flowers in a mason jar vase, her sleeves rolled up, apron smudged with flour. When the door chimed, she looked up, smiling, and then froze. The vase slipped from her hand and shattered. "Elijah," she whispered. The young man turned sharply toward her. "What's wrong, Mom?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Derek. Elijah turned to the man beside him. It hit him like a wave. The eyes, the jawline, the silence that followed was unbearable. "You," Elijah breathed, stepping back. "You're him." Derek nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't know it was you, I swear. I didn't recognize you." "Didn't recognize your own son?" Elijah's voice was cold, wounded. "You didn't recognize the person you left before he was even born." Naomi slowly rounded the counter, her hands trembling. "Derek," she said softly, "why now?" "I didn't come looking," he said, voice hoarse. "I wasn't trying to find you. He just helped me. I didn't know who he was, but when I saw you—" Elijah turned to his mother, fire in his eyes. "You don't owe him anything." Naomi placed a calming hand on his arm. "I know," but she turned back to Derek. "Sit down. I'll bring you something to eat." "I don't deserve—" "I know," she said, "but I feed everyone who's hungry." Elijah stormed out. Naomi brought a bowl of hot chicken stew and cornbread to Derek's table. He stared down at it, then up at her. "I lost everything," he whispered. "I've spent every night of the past 8 years thinking about what I did to you, and to him." "I forgave you a long time ago, Derek," she said. "Not because you deserved it, but because I didn't want your shadow in my life anymore." Derek's eyes welled with tears. He's incredible. You did that, without me." "No," Naomi said, voice quiet but firm. "I did that because of you, because I had no choice, because I had to become the mother he needed when the father he deserved disappeared." Later that evening, at home, Elijah sat on the porch steps, arms crossed, staring out into the fading pink of sunset. Naomi joined him, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You didn't have to be kind to him," Elijah said without looking at her. "No," she agreed, but I wanted you to see what strength really looks like. It's not revenge, it's choosing peace." "I'm not ready for that," he said. "I don't think I ever will be." "That's okay," she replied. "Healing doesn't have a schedule." The next morning, Elijah returned to the spot where he'd first met Derek. He wasn't there. But he returned again the day after, and the next. On the third day, he found him sitting beneath a tree reading a newspaper someone had left behind. "I forgive you," Elijah said flatly. Derek looked up stunned. "You? What?" "I forgive you," Elijah repeated, "not because you earned it, but because I refuse to let your choices define me anymore." Derek opened his mouth, but Elijah held up a hand. "That doesn't mean we're family. That doesn't mean you get to make up for lost time. I'm 24. I've already lived the years you missed, but I'm not carrying this bitterness forward." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it over. "This is a rehabilitation center. They help people get back on their feet. Former inmates, addicts, people who want to change. Go there. Start over. Do something that matters." Derek stared at the card, his hands shaking. I will. Thank you." "I'm not doing it for you," Elijah said, stepping back. "I'm doing it for me." 5 years passed. The Willowspoon had 3 locations across Houston, each one a haven for good food and good people. Naomi had become something of a local icon, a businesswoman, a mentor, a symbol of quiet resilience. Mrs. Monroe still sat outside the original cafe every Sunday, now in her 80s, telling stories to wide-eyed children who called her Grandma Hattie. Elijah ran his own consulting firm, married a woman named Alana who was just as passionate about community work, and had 2 daughters who inherited Naomi's laugh. At Sunday dinners, their table overflowed with food and laughter, clattering forks and shared dreams. They didn't talk about Derek often, but sometimes a letter would arrive, neatly folded, handwritten, thoughtful. He was working as a security guard at a small logistics company. He lived alone, stayed sober, and kept sending Elijah birthday cards, never asking for anything, never overstepping. One summer evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Elijah looked at Naomi as she wiped down the kitchen counter. "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" he asked. She smiled gently. "Sometimes, but then I remember, it's not about what we lost, it's about what we built." And in that quiet kitchen, filled with the echoes of survival, love, and second chances, they sat, mother and son, knowing they had already won. Not with revenge, not with wealth, but with grace. And that was enough. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets of Houston in a warm amber hue as Elijah stepped out of his firm's glass-paneled building. He loosened his tie, exhaled the tension from back-to-back client meetings, and looked up at the sky. Its fading light cast long shadows along the pavement. It had been a good day. His team had just signed a major deal with an energy startup, and he had personally been invited to speak at a national tech leadership summit in Austin. At only 29, Elijah Blake had become a name people respected, admired not just for his intellect, but for the integrity that grounded every one of his decisions. But that evening something tugged at him, a quiet pull, as if a string from the past had been gently plucked. It had been months since he last heard from Derek. The older man had sent a Christmas card, polite and sparse, with nothing but a short note. "Still working. Hope you're well. D." Elijah hadn't replied, not out of anger, just detachment. It was hard to summon warmth for someone who had been a ghost for so long. As he turned the corner toward the parking garage, a familiar sound reached his ears, the laughter of children and the clatter of plates. He looked up and saw the glow of the Willowspoon, his mother's original cafe, still alive, still full. On impulse, he walked toward it. Inside, Naomi stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, her hands flour-dusted, moving with the easy grace of someone who had made this dance her own. Her hair was streaked with more silver now, but her smile hadn't changed. She looked up and spotted him instantly, her eyes lighting up. "You're early," she said, setting down a tray. "Thought I'd surprise you." "Well, grab an apron then. We've got a full house." Elijah laughed. "I just closed a major deal, and now I'm bussing tables?" She winked. "That's the kind of balance that builds character." As he stepped behind the counter, tying an old apron around his waist, he noticed a woman sitting at the back booth, Mrs. Hattie Monroe. Her frame had shrunk with time, but her eyes still gleamed with that unmistakable spark. 2 children sat beside her, wide-eyed and giggling at one of her exaggerated stories. Elijah made his way over. "Hey, Grandma Hattie." She looked up, smiling. Well, well, if it isn't the boy who used to spill orange juice more than he drank it," he chuckled. "I had a system. You had a mess." They laughed together, and for a moment everything in the world was right. As the dinner rush faded and customers slowly trickled out into the cool evening, Naomi and Elijah sat at a corner table, sipping coffee. The cafe had quieted, the hum of the city softening outside the windows. "You know," Naomi said, watching the steam rise from her mug, "I never imagined this." "This?" Elijah asked. "This peace, this fullness. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for. Then you came along." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You gave me everything, Mom. Every late-night study session, every packed lunch, every lesson about kindness. You built this life." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "And you made it bloom." They sat in silence for a beat, hearts full. Then Elijah exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about him." Naomi's eyes softened. She didn't need clarification. "Derek?" "Yeah," he said, looking down. "I keep wondering if there's more I should say. I forgave him, sure, but I don't know if I ever really closed the loop." Naomi nodded. "Closure is a funny thing. Sometimes it doesn't come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from choosing not to carry the weight anymore." He nodded. "Still, maybe it's time I talk to him again, as a man, not as the angry boy he left behind." The next week, Elijah visited the rehabilitation center where Derek had once stayed. The staff told him Derek had completed his program years ago and now worked as a night guard at a distribution warehouse in North Houston. They gave him a contact number. That Friday, Elijah called. Derek answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Hi, it's Elijah." There was a pause, a breath too long. "Hey, wow, I didn't expect... How are you?" "I'm good. I was wondering if you'd want to meet, just to talk." "Of course," Derek said quickly, maybe too quickly. "Yes, absolutely." They agreed to meet at a quiet diner downtown. When Elijah walked in, Derek was already there, wearing a pressed shirt that looked a little too big, his beard trimmed but graying, his hands folded tightly on the table. He stood when he saw Elijah, unsure whether to extend a hand or not. "Hi," Elijah said, sliding into the booth. "Hi," Derek echoed, sitting awkwardly. "Thanks for reaching out." "I wanted to understand," Elijah said, "not to revisit everything, but to ask, did you ever think about me? Back then." Derek swallowed. "Every day. But I convinced myself that you were better off, that my presence would only make things worse." "That's the easy story," Elijah said quietly. "The one you told yourself to feel less guilty." Derek flinched but didn't argue. "I didn't need perfect," Elijah continued. "I just needed effort." Derek's eyes watered. "I failed you. I know I did. And not a day goes by that I don't wish I'd done things differently, but you became extraordinary anyway. That's your mother. That's you." "I became who I am because I had no other choice," Elijah said. "I had to be strong for her, and in a way, maybe your absence taught me that." They sat in silence. Then Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "I've been writing letters, never sent them. Didn't think I had the right, but they're yours." Elijah took the envelope and slid it into his coat pocket. "Thank you." They parted outside the diner with a quiet handshake, No promises of more, but something soft settling between them, a truce perhaps, or something close to peace. That Sunday, the Willowspoon held its monthly family table night, a long table dinner where regulars, newcomers, and friends shared food, stories, and laughter. Naomi sat at the head with Elijah and Alana by her side, their two daughters chasing each other between chairs. Grandma Hattie sat in her usual spot, doling out candy and cautionary tales about talking to boys too early. Derek didn't attend. He had never been invited, and Naomi hadn't mentioned him. But as she looked around at the joy filling the room, the music, the aromas, the clinking of cutlery against plates, Naomi felt the ache of the past begin to loosen. Not because the pain had vanished, but because something stronger had grown in its place. After dinner, Elijah walked Naomi home. They paused at the front porch, where the wind rustled the trees and cicadas hummed a soft lullaby. "Mom," he said, "I think I'm going to keep talking to him. Not often, not deeply, but enough to remind him that change is still possible." Naomi smiled. "That's your choice, and it's a generous one." "I'm not doing it for him," Elijah added. "I know," she said. "You're doing it for the man you've become." He kissed her forehead. "Thanks for raising me to choose grace." And in that quiet, starlit moment, Naomi realized she had given her son something more valuable than success, more enduring than vengeance. She had given him the ability to love without limits, and to forgive without losing himself. And that, she knew, was the legacy that would last generations. The aroma of cinnamon, butter, and roasted tomatoes filled the air as the golden hour sunlight filtered through the wide windows of the Willowspoon's flagship location, now nestled on a tree-lined corner in the heart of Houston Heights. Inside, laughter echoed off warm wooden beams and colorful murals depicting community, resilience, and joy. It was a Sunday evening, and as tradition had it, family dinner was in full swing. Naomi stood at the center of it all, radiant, content, a little older now, but carrying herself with the calm grace of a woman who had weathered every kind of storm and emerged with her soul intact. She moved from table to table, placing dishes of baked mac and cheese, fried catfish, and roasted plantains before friends and customers who had long since become family. At the large round table near the window sat Elijah, now 30, confident and compassionate, with his arm resting behind his wife, Alana. Their two daughters, Eden and Sari, giggled as they passed cornbread muffins back and forth, barely able to sit still for more than a minute. Alana caught Naomi's eye and smiled warmly, mouthing, "Thank you." Naomi only nodded, eyes misty. No words were needed. Grandma Hattie Monroe was seated in her favorite chair, bundled in a knitted shawl despite the warmth of the room. Though her steps were slower and her voice sometimes faltered, her wit remained razor-sharp. She regaled the girls with tales from back when phones had cords and people cooked without apps. The girls hung on every word, eyes wide, mouths full. There was something sacred about these Sundays. No matter how busy the week had been, no matter what deals Elijah had signed or how many hours Naomi had logged in the kitchen, this table brought them back to what mattered. It was not just a ritual, it was a celebration of everything they had survived, everything they had become. After dinner, as the plates were cleared and children chased each other around the patio, Naomi stepped outside for air. The sky was a dusky purple, stars blinking shyly into view. The hum of the city pulsed softly beyond the treetops. She leaned against the railing, a mug of ginger tea warming her hands. A few minutes later, Elijah joined her. He handed her a folded napkin with one of Eden's crayon drawings on it, stick figures labeled Mama, Daddy, Nana, and Grandma Hattie, all holding hands in front of a big house with a heart-shaped window. Naomi laughed softly. "We're quite the clan." "She sees love everywhere," Elijah said, "probably because she's surrounded by it." Naomi smiled but didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out toward the street, where just beyond the glow of the cafe lights, the past still lingered like a long-forgotten echo. "Have you heard from him lately?" she asked quietly. Elijah nodded. "He sends postcards sometimes, short ones. He works security at a storage facility. Says he's clean. Still on his own. And you? How do you feel about him now?" Elijah took a deep breath. "I think I've made peace with the fact that there's a scar. It doesn't hurt anymore, but it's there. A reminder." Naomi nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the mug. "Scars mean you've healed," she said. "They're proof that pain passed through, but didn't stay. I used to wish he'd come back and try to fix everything," Elijah admitted. "But I don't anymore. I don't want perfect reconciliation. I just want truth and peace." Naomi reached over and brushed a speck of dust off his lapel, a mother's habit she'd never lost. "And you found it," she said. "You didn't let him define you. That's your victory." Inside the cafe, Eden began pulling at Alana's sleeve, asking if Nana could tell her the story of how she got strong. Naomi laughed softly, walking back in with Elijah behind her. "All right, baby girl," she said, scooping Eden onto her lap. "Let me tell you something." She looked around at the room, at Alana, beaming, at Grandma Hattie nodding off into her third cup of tea, at Sari drawing constellations and mashed potatoes, and then down at Eden's eager face. "Once upon a time," Naomi began, "there was a girl who had nothing but a dream and a baby in her belly. She was thrown out into the world with no home, no money, and no one to catch her. She was scared, and she was hurt, but she looked down at her belly and made a promise. You will not suffer for someone else's mistake." Eden's eyes widened. "What happened next?" Naomi leaned closer. She got up. Every morning, no matter how tired, no matter how hungry. She sold fruit, she carried loads, she cooked meals on borrowed stoves, and with each day, she built a little more, not just for herself, but for that baby. That boy grew up to be a man who helped people, who built companies, who started a family filled with kindness. "Was that boy Daddy?" Eden whispered. Naomi smiled. "Yes, baby. That boy was your daddy." Eden looked at Elijah with awe, then back at Naomi. "And you're the strong girl?" "I was," Naomi said softly, "but now I'm a strong woman." Eden rested her head on Naomi's chest, whispering, "I want to be like you." Naomi closed her eyes, holding the child close, her heartbeat echoing a rhythm of love that had never wavered. She had raised a man who had chosen forgiveness over bitterness. She had turned abandonment into empowerment, silence into strength. She had built more than a cafe. She had built a legacy. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the cafe had returned to its quiet self, Naomi walked through the dining room, wiping down tables and turning off lights. As she reached the front door, she paused, glancing at a photo framed near the entrance. It was of her and Elijah at the opening of the second Willowspoon. They stood arm in arm, both beaming, surrounded by staff, balloons, and a banner that read, "Built with Love." Underneath the photo, a plaque read, "Strength is not the absence of struggle. It's the triumph of choosing love again and again." She traced the words with her fingers. Outside, the city moved as it always had, restless, alive, unpredictable. But inside that little cafe, on that quiet corner, Naomi knew what she had created. Not a perfect life, but a beautiful one. One born from heartbreak, sustained by hope and redeemed by love. And that, more than anything, was the happy ending she had never dared to dream, but had built with her own hands. Because sometimes the greatest stories don't end with reunion or revenge, but with a table full of laughter, a legacy passed through generations, and the quiet knowledge that you've already won. This story reminds us that life's greatest victories aren't always loud or dramatic. They're often quiet, steady, and born from the toughest trials. Naomi was abandoned, broken, and left with nothing but a baby in her arms and determination in her heart. She didn't wait for someone to save her. She became her own hero, and her son's too. What we learn from Naomi is that strength isn't just about surviving. It's about choosing love when hate would be easier. It's about forgiveness when bitterness could feel justified. And most of all, it's about building something beautiful, not just for ourselves, but for the people we love, even when the world gives us every reason not to. Elijah, raised without the presence of a father, didn't let that define him. Instead, he became the kind of man who broke the cycle. He proved that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. With the foundation of his mother's love and sacrifices, he built a future rooted in kindness, resilience, and grace. In the end, this story is about redemption, not the kind that fixes the past, but the kind that frees us from being trapped in it. It teaches us that sometimes the strongest legacy we leave behind isn't wealth or titles, but the courage to forgive, the will to rise, and the ability to love deeply in spite of everything. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your next moment of inspiration could be just one story away.